Welcome and thank you for listening. My topic is history, architecture, and conservation of the Holy Aedicule. I share now this one. Yes, share. Yes, okay, and full screen. Is that okay? Full screen. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Preservation of the Holy Aedicule in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, Jerusalem. History, architecture, preservation, and relevant interventions. Jerusalem, a modern city of today and in the same time a very old city, built on rocky ground at an altitude of about 750 meters and a direct distance from the sea 55 kilometers, by road 66 kilometers, is characterized as strongly by geological data as few other similar cities on Earth. 25 kilometers to the west passes one of the largest faults on the planet. Along with slowly but steadily, the continental plate of Africa is splitting, resulting in the Great Lakes of Tanzania and Kenya, the vast Rift Valley, the Red Sea, the elongated Gulf of Aqaba, and the Jordan Valley. The shifting of the lithosphere slabs on either side of this line is accompanied by magma rising from below and filling with products of fracture, but also from erosion being transported by the rivers, thus the narrowing of the Red Sea's south end, which however is not enough to maintain the original level. Hence the great depth of these lakes and seas, but also the extreme case of the crossing of the Jordan by valleys and lakes with a much lower level than the sea. The southernmost of these lakes, the famous Dead Sea, with level and riparian flat areas at an altitude of 422 meters below sea level, is the lowest part of the planet. Therefore, the altitude difference between the Jordan Valley and Jerusalem exceeds 1150 meters. Ascending from the Mediterranean coast to Jerusalem, it encounters verdant and cultivated lowland, hilly and semi-mountainous soils, all sloping towards the sea. But as soon as it crosses the ridge of Jerusalem and begins its descent to the Jordan Valley, it encounters only a stony and sandy desert with few bushes and almost a dead soil, which only very close to the river shows some elemental vegetation, while the Dead Sea proper, or Thalata asphaltiati in Greek, ancient Greek name of that, with water 25% heavier than normal and 10 times saltier than the sea, is simply prohibitive for any vegetation. Just few species can sustain this situation. The situation is sometimes in places along the riverside, but only after intensive efforts by persistent cultivators with strong state support and the use of abundant technology. However, The observant visitor, as he wonders about the existence of such intense erosion and so many gorges in such an arid country, can only think that just 10 millennia ago, 10,000 years ago, the climate was very different, the rainfall much greater, and the vegetation abundant. When the urban development of Jerusalem began almost 4 millennia ago, the climate, without being the original, was, however, much more favorable than the present. Systematic olive cultivation ensured quality of life, and excellent rocks allowed the development of building and architecture of stone in place of the former housing of nomadic life in tents. The first significant phase of Jerusalem, the city of David, which flourished 3 millennia ago, is located in the southernmost and lowest part of the old city, in the eastern part of the present lower city, protected by narrow valleys in the east, Cedar Valley, south, Enom Valley, and west, simply Valley, later renamed Tyropion Valley, that is Cheesemakers Valley. To the north of the city of David, a small elevation, Mount Moriah. I try to point this. Could you please recognize the pointer? I'm moving the pointer. Could you please tell me?
Yes, yes, we can see that.
Okay. Then this is the city of David down here. This is, of course, the gorgeous already mentioned valleys, and the middle one is the order of importance for the urbanistic development of the early city. Here is the lowest point, and therefore there is the Siloam Basin. Underneath here is the underground waterwork, nearly 500 meters long, but we'll speak about it later. On the top, you see the Mount Moriah, and then the extension to the west and north, further extensions of the city, but down here was the starting point, according, of course, to books I read till now. I don't know if there are new evidence uh, collected by recent studies. Up there this is the greatest uh, ex, ex, the greatest expanse of the city, but originally it was rather small, spreading out towards the higher levels to the north and west. And if you follow this wadi downstream, you finally reach the Dead Sea in a distance of 34 kilometers. Since the first start, the city has expanded to a higher ground to southwest of the Temple Mount, Upper City or Zion. The maximum height is 772 meters, and in view of an Assyrian invasion, Sennacherib was the king of Assyria, invading the south, the area of Jerusalem. In 701, the city was fortified by King Hezekiah with a very strong wall nearly 7 meters thick. The pictures show that. Well, through a half a kilometer tunnel already mentioned, um, was made for the obvious reason to bring water from the sources to the Siloam Basin. In the 1st century BC, Herod the Great carried out works of incredible size, with which the city acquired such a monumental character as few others in the world. The mountain, with a new temple, second temple in the middle, was transformed into a very high rectangular terrace, 500 meters long and 300 meters wide. This is, to my knowledge, the greatest simple oblong platform, artificial platform in the world, by far exceeding uh, similar works by Romans or ancient Greeks or Persians. And the retaining walls of that, built with perfectly carved large, sometimes huge stones. You see in the picture, some of the stones reach a length of 10 meters. There is another stone not shown here, nearly 200 tons, very enormous stone. "300 meters to the west, a new wall, second wall, surrounded a northern extension of the city just west of the Temple Mount. Outside of this stretched the quarries of its stones, which to some extent, due to their depth, had the function of a moat in front of the wall. These quarries, as lying outside the city at the time, soon became the site of tombs embedded in their rocky walls. This is not a particular situation in Jerusalem. It is a more or less common situation in all places in Europe where quarries are situated outside cities, and after the quarry had served its purpose, it was very common to use the sides of the cut stone for to for rock cut tombs, provided the rock is not very hard like marble or granite, but rather medium soft, that is in an average of 2 degrees in the hardness scale. And in this way, there are many such tombs in Italy, for instance, in Greece and elsewhere. In 70 AD, after a Jewish revolt, the city was destroyed by the Roman army under the command of Titus, long before he became emperor, and the population was expelled. Very soon life returned to the city with new tensions, and after a new violent uprising in the year 132, the Roman army, led by Hadrian, again imposed the rule of Rome, and the destroyed city was re-established as Aelia Capitolina. It was then that the place of the western wall, after an artificial elevation of the ground, a central avenue was formed, a Cardo Maximus, to use the terminology, the Roman terminology for any street of that sort, nearly bisecting the city, while further west in the area of the Korres, which were partially embanked and partially cleared by extensive excavations, the Forum was formed, where now the Moors stand. And here you see a very simplified plan showing the essentials: the Temple Mount to the right, the Cardo Maximus from north to south, and to the west side of it, the Temple of Venus, green, and the Forum, present Muristan. But I've mentioned already the Temple of Venus. And here in this plan, you see the hypothetical ground plan of this important Temple of Venus in relation to the contour of the later monuments, mainly the Church of Resurrection. In the meantime, yes, few pictures for the same. In this restoration, you see the place of here, the Temple of Aphrodite, a part of the new church to the east of it, facing east. Here is the Cardo Maximus. Down here is the barracks of the military camp. And of course the Temple Mount here. In the meantime, the new religion of Christianity, despite mishaps and persecutions, managed to attract the masses and to become an effective factor of the future development. Almost 2 centuries after the Hadrian urban reform, the Queen Mother Helen carried out her well-known researches for the location of the place of martyrdom. In this program, the Temple of Aphrodite was demolished. The previous embankments were excavated until the discovery of the former quarry areas with the cave tombs, and one of them, 125 meters west of the Cardo Maximus, was traditionally recognized as that of Jesus, while to the east of it, according to the same tradition, a rocky outcrop, a typical unexploited part of the once quarry, was identified as Golgotha. Finally, even further east, in a part of the quarry extending to a considerable depth after its systematic excavation, the Holy Cross was found. The church of resurrection building type. After the Milan Edict, and especially during the time of Queen Mother's archaeological discoveries, Christianity began to triumph, and in many places, especially urban, the construction of ecclesiastical buildings proceeded with official permission and sponsorships or initiative of important political figures of religious and economic life. These buildings mostly followed the simple type of basilica. They were rectangular with parallel colonnades, or sometimes they were pericentric, that is, circular, or polygonal, belonging to the special category of the martyrium, that is, buildings of memory and honor of new faith martyrs. San Stephanos Martyrium is perhaps the most known because Stephan was one of the first martyrs of the new faith. And here on this screen, you see the subsequent acts taken to transform this area to what became later the complex church, a complex of different edifices, all in like as you see in the plan. Of course, a certain part of the plan is hypothetical. We have to keep that in mind, that many parts of it are hypothetical. And the ground plan on top is just the mental or the theoretical uh, uh, disposition, arrangement, configuration based on ancient descriptions, and of course on the knowledge of typology of such religious buildings. We can summarize: the church covers the supposed sites of the crucifixion, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. It was built in the late 320s on Constantine's order. Was destroyed by the Caliph Hakim in 1009. The important issue now is to take a look of the symbolism behind the building type of this interesting church. The semantic connection of the function of martyrium with the cycle was not a new idea of the Christians. It was just the preservation of a symbolism dating back to ancient times. Indeed, in ancient Greek architecture, circular buildings known as domes or tholoi or heroa served the idea of the hearth of a city or the burial place of a leader, hero, builder, and or founder. The hearth in its ideal form is circular, as is the gathering of many people around the fire. The ideal burial monument is similarly circular, as is the primary form of the earthen mount. So temples of Hestia, Vesta in Latin, Greek domes, burials, such or buildings, colonnaded buildings such as the Tholos of Epidaurus, Roman mausoleums in the picture, and Christian temples dedicated to the memory of martyrs for reasons not at all different, fall within the realm of the circular buildings. You see, excluding this building, famous Mycenaean Agamemnon tomb, the circle is rather forced by statics, but this building of late classical times is a grave. Another, again, a grave is a memorial, and as a memorial of a deceased had to be round. The same, for instance, in Rome for August and for Hadrian, both made round for the symbolism explained. And here you see the Tholos at Epidaurus, which is symbolically the grave monument of Asclepius, the goddess Asclepius, and therefore the round form. Otherwise, had to be rectilinear, like the Parthenon. But since it was symbolically the burial, the grave of a hero, god, had to be circular. This is the ancient symbolism, therefore, followed by the Christian builders during the first centuries of Christianity, with many examples, among them the foremost and perhaps the earliest is the Temple of Resurrection in Jerusalem. And of course, of the same type, Pantheon in Rome, well known. And now, few words about the typology of this complex. Based on all this, the Church of the Resurrection was reasonable in part, the one associated with the Holy Cross, to follow the building type of the Basilica as far as it had to memorize the Holy Cross. But the other part, over the tomb, had to be round. The construction of the temple is traditionally connected with the Roman Emperor Constantine, but in fact is its present form, with all additions that complement it in many aspects, it obviously the result of successive construction phases after collapse, destruction, or demolition of various parts of it. There is always a serious scientific issue of distinguishing these construction phases as a whole, but also for each individual column, each individual wall, dome, corridor, pillar, or space in particular. As is reasonable, the date from which the investigation of the construction phases and construction adventures of each old building begins is always the still preserved parts, all the traces of wear, all the discontinuities of the structure, each point, line, or meeting surface of parts of different structure, or any unreasonable upheaval or anomaly difference of foundations or relevant architectural lines and forms, any unreasonable expedience of fracture of building lines and surfaces, any point or area of replacement of structural or decorative elements with other newer and many other points of interest, sometimes very indistinguishable or obscure. At the same time, all historical testimonies are taken into account after a literary analysis and evaluation. As a rule, due to the nature of things, the course of historical research proceeds from the most recent to the oldest. However, the composition of the results is presented in a regular chronological order, and this will be observed in the present brief history of the construction phases of the Church of the Resurrection, of its accompanying buildings, including the building containing the Holy Sepulchre, of its better known as Holy Aedicule, which as an independent building stands in the middle of the large circular space of the rotunda. In its initial configuration, building of the Church of the Resurrection began after the order of Constantine in 326, as I said, with care of Bishop Macarius, and lasted for about a decade. Architects were Zenobius and Eustathius. The result was a building complex about 500 feet, almost 150 meters in length, extending westward from the main boulevard, Cardo Maximus, to the next Cardo, the first West Cardo. This composition consisted of the following parts, successively from east to west. On the screen from right to left, please. Not from left to right, from right to left. I enumerate the components, altogether 6 components from A to F. A, 50 meters wide propylaeon, not preserved. You see the colonnade and the stairs facing the then Cardo Maximus. Courtyard atrium of 800 square meters, not preserved. A little bit trapezoidal in plan. Then the basilica with 5 aisles, wooden roofed, almost 60 meters long, with marble columns and luxurious panel roofs, not preserved. D, rectangular courtyard of 1,000 square meters, with a preserved part of Golgotha, Calvary in the picture, in the lower right corner of this courtyard. E, a originally semicircular courtyard, 40 meters wide, with the Holy Sepulchre in the center, which immediately gave way to the current rotunda, repeatedly remodeled to this day. And finally, auxiliary buildings to the north of the rotunda, and perhaps a baptistry, probably to the south of it. As abundant evidence, this picture is from internet. As abundant evidence shows, after the recognition of the Holy Sepulchre, the area around this once quarry area, with the rocky walls of irregular orientation and the various levels of mining, was leveled a little lower than the threshold level of the tomb door. In the picture, I will try to use. Could you please see the pointer? This is the hypothetical contour of the rock of the quarry, this line. The bottom of the quarry, as always, is irregular. This is an outcrop left unhewn in the quarry, and somewhere here the cave recognized as that of Jesus. And then they had to level down the superfluous rock and leave only a part of the rock containing the grave chamber. To my view, the drawing is overdone. The physical features of the ground outside this area does not support this contour, and to my opinion, it has to be restored in a lower profile. Even that part with Golgotha has to be restored a little bit lower. This is not in scale. The drawing is not good in scale. Anyhow, but these drawings better explain the situation. Here you see the most probable contour of the rock above, and the chamber, burial chamber, the descent to the, even the stone door. Here on the ground plan, you see the stone door, the chambers, and here the way, this supposed way they followed to isolate the part of the rock containing the chamber, the burial chamber, and to remove all the rest, including traces of previous quarrying activities or burials, because the area was full of graves for many other deceased people. After the leveling, the only higher preserved elements of the former landscape were the rock of Golgotha and the now isolated rock remnant containing the Holy Sepulchre. Since then, at a lower level, except for the deepest area where the cross was found, some other deep sections of older works are invisible and largely unknown, while some tombs have been left visible to the west as belonging to Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus. Their location was low enough to escape abolishment and high enough to escape refilling. Here, an effort to represent the basics of this architectural complex. This is a drawing of mine with a selective use of the evidence we have in our disposition, especially to explain the the presence of double columns at this and at this end of the space? I think is a interesting question. Otherwise, the composition is based on the 20 supports. 8 of them are piers and 12 are columns. 12 columns is perhaps the outcome of using 12 columns from an ancient building with 6 columns at the front and 6 behind them. Now, a summary of all this said, the subsequent stages in development of the first phase with a semicircle court, a progressive construction of the rotunda. It is obvious that the center of the rotunda does not coincide with the door or the chamber. During a Persian invasion under Khosroes, the Holy Cross was abducted, and the Church of Resurrection suffered significant damage. Shortly afterwards, the church was restored under the care of Patriarch Modestus, and in 629, after a successful campaign against the Persians, Heraclius regained, among other valuables, the Holy Cross, which thus returned to its place. However, the end of the Roman Byzantine rule was approaching. In 634, the Arabs occupied the city, and since then the life of the Christians contained constant dangers and persecutions. Around 1010, by order of Caliph al-Hakim already mentioned, the ancient building complex was almost completely destroyed. But after successful negotiations in 1012, and with the financial help of Emperor Constantine the Monomachos, it was rebuilt from 1042 to 1048 within 6 years, but only in the western and middle part, from the rotunda to the chapel of Santa Helena. The rest of the area to the east, where until recently the front of the basilica extended to the courtyard before it, mostly changed hands. It passed to the hands of the Arabs. As a result, the access of the church from Cardo Maximus, the main avenue, was lost, and since then the sanctuary is accessible from a courtyard of 450 square meters to the south of the Catholicon, the main church, now called this courtyard Hagia Avli, Holy Courtyard, accessible by a narrow alley starting from the once Cardo Maximus, now the narrow but still very important central street of the medieval city, and ending to the once first West Cardo in its present form. This alley is not generally free because the middle part of it, adjacent to the courtyard, called this part of the alley is named Street of Hagia Helene, Santa Helena Street, is isolated by a west gate and an east gate, so that it is a part of the courtyard. Initially, on the south side of the courtyard, there was a portico with a colonnade, some elements of which are still visible. During the reconstruction of 1048, the rotunda underwent substantial alterations. The Holy Aedicule was rebuilt in the western part of the Holy Court, and rebuilt, and in the western part of the Holy Court, there are three very spacious chapels. From north to south, the 40 martyrs, Beers, and Iakovos chapel, each with an entrance on the west side and a three-sided apsis on the east. And finally, in the courtyard of the rotunda, the galleries were restored. Perhaps then, on the east side of this courtyard, three spacious chapels were added, similar to those of the Holy Courtyard. It is interesting to pinpoint this very important fact. Originally, the columns, as you see there, the columns had the normal shape and the normal proportions, more than 1 meter thick and more than 10 meters tall, not without the postament underneath. But during the rebuilding, it was decided no longer to use the columns as complete with all the height of them, but instead to divide them, each one into two equal halves, as shown in this picture. Here you see the original columns, and now the result by division, by dividing the monolithic shaft into two and using each one, and so to create two column shafts out of one. We can perhaps suppose difficulties with the column shafts. Some column shafts could have been broken and not longer being useful and usable. But to my opinion, the reason was different. They decided to add a gallery, a round gallery above. So in order to decrease the height, that is, the stairs necessary for the public to reach the gallery, they decided to make the columns shorter, and so to decrease the height by some 5 meters, also to make the gallery easier accessible. And therefore, this peculiar form of the columns as you see them now. More complicated is the origin of these composite columns with blue, shown with blue, but I'm afraid I cannot easily explain the situation dictating this very peculiar type of columns for this specific place, as I mentioned before by commenting on the eastern part of the rotunda. So I've made these drawings, but I still think to add some explanatory details for the reader. From 10,000, excuse me, for 1073 to 1098, the city was occupied by Seljuk Turks, then fell for only 1 year to the Fatimids, an Arab dynasty based in Egypt, and then after a heavy siege to the Crusaders. And the plan shows the church as was drastically remodeled by the Westerners. The Crusaders carried out a unique reconstruction of the Church of the Resurrection, completed in 1148. The Holy Aedicule acquired a Gothic appearance, and the area of the courtyard of the Rotunda was occupied by the new Romanesque, spacious and towering basilica with a dome and a semicircular apsis to the east, underneath the present apsis of the Greek Catholic Church. Behind the semicircular arch, a perimeter was formed with 3 chapels, possibly replacing the supposedly pre-existing ones on the west side of the abolished courtyard of the Rotunda. Further east, on a deeper ground, the chapel of Santa Helena was erected, sometimes referred to as crypt of Santa Helena, with an entrance from the west. Towards the part of the Holy Courtyard, the current Gothic architectural facade was formed, and to its left, above the chapel of the 40 Saints, a huge 45 meters high bell tower was erected, much higher than the church. In 1187, Saladin, the new leader of the Fatimids and later founder of the Ayyubid dynasty, captured the city, expelled the Latins, and allowed the previously expelled Muslims and Jews to return. He did the same to the Orthodox Christians. In the 13th century, power was occupied by the Mamluks to eventually pass to the Ottomans, who would be the masters of the Middle East and beyond from 1517 to 1917 for exactly 400 years. Before the end of the 15th century, the colonnade of the Holy Courtyard had been destroyed, and what is still left of it are the bases of some of its columns. Before continuing, I think better to show you some some interesting aspects of the 12th century architectural intervention. This is the Holy Courtyard, and the southern entrance, already in a transitional style from Romanesque to Gothic. Further to the left, you see the bell tower, and here this drawing taken from Krautheimer's early Christian architecture. You see the distinction of the 12th century remodeling of the church with dots. Yes, you see the pointer. All these are parts of that intervention. a very complicated task because they had to insert new architectural components into a half ruinous and half existing very old building. And you see here how complicated all this composition had to be. A closer view of the same, and despite the weathering and the age, 800 years and more than 800 years, you see that many parts of the architectural decorations are well preserved and I think are of the highest quality we can find in this century, the 12th century. Is excellent workmanship, carved from behind with very meticulous and specially made meticulous work and specially made tools. And here you see the church as it used to be in the time of Ottoman occupation, in the middle of the screen here, and the court, the street of Santa Helena, once Cardo Maximus, a very busy with narrow street, but very important for the present city, and the modern street, medieval street, and over the once first west Cardo. In 1545, a very strong earthquake caused damage to the building and especially to the 45 meters tall bell tower, whose eruption, increasing with time, eventually dictated the demolition of the upper part, almost 15 meters high. We have to imagine up there the missing upper story of the bell tower, deliberately dismantled to prevent an unpleasing collapse after the earthquake. And here you see the situation at the beginning of the 19th century, and you see that, for instance, the cupola, the main cupola of the martyrium was wooden with a round oculus on top of it. In 1804, 808, a large fire engulfed the huge wooden truncated roof of the rotunda. This part, yes, caught fire in this year, resulting in the severe damage mainly thermal breakage to every stone surface and especially to the columns. Similar damage occurred even inside the Catholic due to the radiation of the collapsing burning wood. Immediately afterwards, with the Sultan's permission and a strict deadline of 15 months, the building was repaired by the worthy empiricist Constantinople architect, royal master builder Nikolaus Komnenos from Midland. He lived from 1770 to 1821. Strong stone structures were added around the pillars of the rotunda, resulting in their transformation into around the columns. Around the columns of the rotunda, he had to build masonry, transform the columns to square pillars to increase uh, stability and bearing capacity of the colonnade. New floors with very thick slabs were also formed then, and the most importantly, the Holy Aedicule was built uh, from the ground, completely renovated externally, and internally only the Holy Grave was maintained as it was before. In 1810, the work was completed with the construction of a new wooden dome above the rotunda, which after a few decades was severely damaged, resulting in its replacement in 1868 with a new French-made dome with an invisible metal frame and an oculus again on top, but later the oculus was covered with glasses. Here you see another view of the same, especially the uh, bell tower, truncated bell tower, and the interior with the Edicula, the Holy Aedicule as rebuilt by Comnenus, the Edicule as rebuilt by Comnenus, again the same. All these are the result by Comnenus intervention. The general application of certain morphological elements added unity and character to the whole. The rich shades of the new stones also contributed to this. Around 1875, the oculus was covered with glass so that the rain would not reach the Holy Aedicule. But this was not a real benefit because at the same time, this glass contributed to the increase of humidity coming from the ground, from the burning of thousands of candles and the breath of thousands of visitors. Suffice to say that each visitor can produce nearly 100 grams of humidity of steam inside, and imagine how big the quantity of humidity would be if there is no way to ventilate the space and to bring and to let the air flow freely inside the space. Over time, new damage, especially after the strong earthquake of 1927 and the already existing deformations of the exterior stone structure of the Holy Aedicule, caused justified concern, even for the risk of collapse. Initially, strong retaining structures were added to the rotunda's periphery and south facade, and in 1949, during the British administration, Freeman Fox engineers installed near the Edicule walls, but additionally also to the pillars of the rotunda, beams, and other reinforcements to prevent further worsening of the already very worrying deformations. In the 1960s, with the agreement of the religious communities and under the scientific responsibility of the architects Anastasios Orlandos from Athens, Jean Trouvelot from France, along with Charles Couasnot and Edouard Outigian, a large-scale operation was launched aimed at restoring static adequacy and form. Then, after another temporary support, the surrounding constructions, reinforcement of the pillars of 1810 were removed, but also the columns themselves, already very weakened, in bad condition, some of them, and they had to be replaced with new ones. Only the light iron construction around the Holy Aedicule remained. Then the new floors of the Greek Catholicon were made, and towards the end of the millennium, the balconies of its southern side with rich Neo-Byzantine marble decoration, brackets, postaments, shields, etc., based on plans of the architect Dr. Theodosios Mitropoulos. Then, unfortunately, the unsightly composition of gilded rays and stars was added around the oculus of the dome, a work by an artist from Europe. In 2015-2016, under the direction of Professor Antonia Moropoulou, the Holy Aedicule was restored by scientists from the National Technical University of Athens and a group of conservators. After the organization of the necessary construction site, the dangerously displaced marbles between the pillars and the columns were removed. The structure behind them was fixed, but also strengthened with new stones. The pillars and columns were rebuilt after the rear parts were corrected in their original position, and in the meantime, capable of invisible titanium fasteners ensured total solidity. The temporary British iron construction that for almost 6 decades protected the building was finally removed. All surfaces were cleaned of the often thickest dark dirt and sediment, revealing the original beauty of the stones and the colorful decoration inside and out, including the top canopy and dome inside, with an invisible metal structure was inside. The success of these interventions justifies the extension of the program to other parts of the monument that need maintenance. Few glimpses of the interior as it was restored by this great enterprise of the 60s, and a more original section that is a part preserved as it was in the time in the 11th century, with no intervention at all. It's very original. Is the northern aisle of the courtyard. Again, a part of that from the opposite point of view. Some details, and this is again the work of Komnenos, 1810. And then much later is this new Byzantine paving, and this magnificent view, although no longer an original or genuine Byzantine, is a creation of Komnenos mainly, but a complex, at least at the level of the intervention, shows a remarkable unity of style. And the apsis, which had also to be rebuilt, and the new dome with obvious elements taken from mainland Greece, and then the chapel, and a few glimpses of historical evidence, this time prints, very old prints from the beginning of the 17th century, and a very interesting proposals of restoration made by scholars in different times in the long history of the monuments studies. David Roberts' a nice view of the Edicule as it was already remodeled by Komnenos. You see also behind which was the situation in the rotunda. Komnenos created this enormous pillars, square pillars, and to hide the columns, as I said, and the interior of the Santa Helena Chapel, again with these peculiar columns, with and an interesting chapter in the efforts made to document the situation is the documentation of the complex by scientists of the National Technical University in the 60s. Here you see the longitudinal section in scale 1 to 40 by a group of scientists of the National Technical University under the guidance of Professor Balodimos. And here our own contribution, drawings, some drawings made by the speaker, the ground plan of the church as remodeled by Komnenos in 1804, 08 to 10. We had a view of that before. Yes, this junction of the junction of the 12th century and 11th century faces to the north of the once courtyard. And this is a postament of the monumental original columns preserved, found inside one of the pillars built by Komnenos, and the details of the Edicule. And you see also important, invaluable remnants of the once original paving. And here you see the severe damage observed around the Edicule. The components are so very dangerously leaning out. There is no straight line anymore, no vertical, no upright. Everything is in high danger of collapse. Again, the situation before intervention, and you see the iron construction, the British iron construction, which was very, very useful as long as the Edicule was in the bad state we've mentioned. Again, the documentation by Balodimos and the team from the National University of Athens. More of the same, more of the same. It was a very detailed documentation encompassing everything over this very large building complex, and including also the Edicule. And therefore, my new drawings do not increase the knowledge in this of architectural detailing, but they are rather descriptive of the situation, deformation, and of course the danger, and they include also hints of the necessary intervention. Based on all this information collected from previous research and at the spot new observations, we present the new additional documentation. Important is the documentation of profiles in scale 1:1 using a very accurate instrument. See the right. And you see also the evaluation of these profiles in terms of metrology, because by the time this was made, the measuring system, the measuring units were different. So one task is, among other things, to reveal the measuring unit used by the builders in the in early 19th century. Yeah, again, the deformation, and the after discussing in our team again and again different scenarios how to schedule the intervention, it was found that this type of timing of scheduling the intervention was very safe. We had the caution not to dismantle everything at once, but to proceed step by step. It's time to remove a certain amount of components, then to bring them into a working site in the workshop, to mend them, to repair them, and to do all these necessary measures and treatments, and then to bring them back to their original position, trying at the same time to correct, to undo the deformations caused by time. And then even the machinery had to be conceived and planned, although some like that were not realized, but the drawings at least show the how important it is to plan everything in advance, even the machinery of the working site like that. The canopy was a great surprise, because the colleagues of the School of Chemical Engineering soon revealed the existence of nice colors and hues, no, and then a very systematic series of treatments had to be conducted in order to reveal and to restore this nice, elegant canopy. The drawing is just showing an interior construction invisible from outside, necessary to support the label parts of this wooden construction. And some details of the same, just to give you an idea of the contribution of the architect in the team. Even the glasses and the frames to make some parts of the rock behind the revetments visible are also studied in detail. It was made with the proper care, since it has to be placed very close to the most important place inside the monument. And therefore, here few glimpses from during this enterprise, the interventions to the walls after removal of the revetment. This is now is the team about to remove some parts of the exterior construction with the moldings made in this nice red stone by Komnenos in 1804, 08, 010. And another view showing the way the arches had to be supported with wooden construction strong enough to prevent them from collapsing. And the team, they had to discuss and to share experience in order to facilitate the better analysis of the data. And you see the civil engineer in charge there, Haris Mouzakis, civil engineer in this interesting work. And again, you see details of the intervention. It is interesting to stress that the uppermost part had not to be dismantled, because this part was intact, in good shape, and the only part affected by deterioration inside in the interior masonry core was that from bottom, from the pavement up to 2 or 3 meters high. This part was preserved, was restored, was reinforced with no harm for the rest, and therefore the whole intervention is one of the more minimalistic interventions I know from my long experience in works of that sort. Finally, we had to investigate underneath, so a hole had to be opened with a special drill. It is 40 centimeters across, and to go deeper to investigate the substrata under the Holy Aedicule, and using smaller holes and taking samples of material of different composition, finding stones underneath or also soil, and based on this research, a drawing was possible showing the construction under the pavement and under the Holy Aedicule. So a subsidence of 1 centimeter along the northern along the northern side was explained, and it is obvious that in the future further measures had to be taken in this respect. Thank you very much for your attention, and if there are any questions, I'm ready to talk with you or try to give an answer. Thank you for your attention. Bye. Could you please hear me? Hello?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Yes.
Professor Korres,
Yes, please.
do you think that this is Kyriakos Lambropoulos speaking,
Yes, yes, Kyriakos.
and I have a talk on Friday, continuing on your research. Do you believe that much of the original Edicule, the monolithic Edicule, has survived throughout the ages? We have done some research, you know, that we have done with ground penetrating radar, but do you, when you go back into the past, do you think that originally the Edicule of Constantine preserved much of the original tomb, as many of the scholars believe? Like, no, it was wider than whatever has remained so far, taller, and what do you think about from an architectural point of view?
I'm not optimistic. Originally, we had the faith to these theories, and we had although and we had ideas how to combine evidence from outside, from for instance, some uh, dissymmetries or some deviations of the present edicula as evidence of something behind them. Still, this idea is good, but thanks to your research, and especially thanks to intervention which gave access to what was previously inaccessible, we know now that Komnenos had to remove the nice Gothic revetment of the medieval face of the monument. To speak of a Constantinian face is not easy, because already the medieval intervention of the Crusaders completely eliminated the exterior components, the exterior, say, masonry or revetment or ashlars of the Constantinian phase. And therefore, now the best left for us is properly to combine all evidence and to scrutinize all this evidence and to use reliable examples and comparable examples of similar monuments in order further to evaluate the evidence we possess now.
Thank you, thank you. I think this is the problem that although the church has been, as Professor Biddle has said, since the church has been widely researched, for some peculiar reason, the Holy Aedicule was not researched accordingly. You have seen that in your presentation, that there's a lot of speculation both for the plan of the churches. Many scholars they look at the same church, they describe it, they reconstruct it differently, and it is an even worse situation for the Holy Aedicule. As I will show you on Friday also that we have so many depictions of the Holy Aedicule and we lose track of how it looked like in the ages. Only in the last 2 or 3 centuries we have better depictions of the Aedicule that we can use and scrutinize, as you said, to have a better idea of what was the structure before Komnenos. But
Yes.
I think it was a good opportunity that the university, during the recent rehabilitation, had the chance, first of all, to open the tomb, to open the Aedicule, and have a better glimpse of the internal layers of history that have been preserved into the Aedicule, and then we can hopefully give a better idea of how it looked in the past. Thank you.
Yes, exactly.
I would like to thank you very much, Professor Korres, Agapite Manoli. I took a lot of pain to prepare and present such a work, and thank you very much indeed, because it is integrating from the point of view of the history of architecture and the history of the site, the environment, and of course, per se, the monument. So thank you very much. It's great.
Thank you, Doña. And let's proceed any further.
Indeed.
Thank you. Bye.
Indeed. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Are there any interventions? Does anybody want the floor to intervene? Okay, thank you very much. It was the first seminar in the series of the Edicula seminars within this common attendance by the 3 master courses of NTUA, of La Sapienza, and of Bezalel. It will continue and will end up on next Monday, I think. No, on next Tuesday. Thank you very much. Thank you. Have a nice afternoon.